Wonderful to be with everyone. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Well, wonderful belated Mahasamadhi for Gurudeva. We had a wonderful puja here, which we live streamed, and I'm sure many of you saw it. It has about 1,200 views on YouTube, which is wonderful to get it out to so many individuals and families. As was requested, today's presentation, as well as next week's presentation, has some special items about Gurudeva in honor of his Mahasamadhi. Oops, I have to share. Okay, let's share the screen before we go here. Oh, where is it? There it is, right there, Gurudeva, hiding in the middle. Share. So we're drawing material on Saivasiddhanta, and we're using a presentation that existed and adding a lot of new material to it, showing Gurudeva's unique contributions. The basic material comes from Merging with Shiva, Chapter 52, the final conclusions for all mankind, which makes sense. That's the final chapter, right? 52 weeks in a year. And we have some other material and definitions from University of Madras Tamil Lexicon and verses from Tirumanduram. And as I mentioned, we're highlighting a number of Gurudeva's unique contributions. So when it's a unique contribution, we'll have a slide come out that says unique contribution. So we're focusing on the practices of Saivasiddhanta, which are, of course, the four padas. And this is an introduction. We want three key Saivasiddhanta terms to be clear. Sometimes they get confused. First is pada, a stage of practice and unfoldment of which there are four. So 4 padas, 4 stages. The second is marga, path. Each pada has its own marga, which states the relationship the soul has to God. So we could call the first stage the Charya pada or the Dasa marga. Both terms could be used and are referring to the same thing. So each stage has the name of its pada and the name of its marga. And as I mentioned, the marga states the relationship the soul has to God, such as servant to master, child to parent, etc. The third is patavi, attainment. Each pada has its own specific attainment. So the word patavi is not used in the Master Course Trilogy. We just use the English word attainment, spiritual accomplishment. Now to Gurudeva's overview description of the 4 padas. The eternal path is divided naturally into 4 separate categories. The Bhagavad Gita, the popular book which you all know from your studies in Vedanta, and which has made Hindu philosophy well known in America, defines these as 4 separate non-progressive paths called Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. We all know that. In Agamic scripture, these are defined a little differently and are considered to be 4 stages called padas of a progressive path. So the yogas are separate. The padas are one path that has 4 stages. Termed charya, kriya, yoga, and jnana. So those are the Sanskrit terms. Tamil equivalents, sadhyaya, kiriyaya, yogam, and jnanam. These 4 padas are quite similar to the 4 yogas of Vedanta: karma yoga, bhakti yoga, raja yoga, and jnana yoga. However, there's one key difference. Whereas in Vedanta, you can choose to follow just one of the yogas, in Siddhanta, we need to pass through all 4 padas. A simple analogy will illustrate the difference. The goal is to walk across a shallow stream on a path of river rocks. The most widely known interpretation of Vedanta gives us 4 separate rock paths to choose from, one for each of the 4 yogas, all of which lead across the river. Siddhanta gives us only one path for crossing the river, which consists of 4 stones: charya, kriya, yoga, and jnana. According to the Agamic tradition, these 4 categories are the natural sequence of the soul's evolutionary process. Much like the development of a butterfly from egg to larva, from larva to caterpillar, from caterpillar to pupa, and then the final metamorphosis from pupa to butterfly. Each butterfly, without exception, will follow this pattern of development, and every soul will mature through charya to kriya, through kriya to yoga, and into jnana. The University of Madras Tamil Lexicon has a term describing this exact concept: Nalupada Saivam. The Saivite doctrine that the initiate should pass successively through charya, kriya, yoga, and jnana stages, and thence obtain moksha. We couldn't have asked for a more perfect definition if we wrote it ourselves. It's just crystal clear how Gurudeva explained it all. Before entering these stages, the soul is immersed in the lower nature, the Anava Marga, or self-centered path, bound in fear and lust, hurtful rage, jealousy, confusion, selfishness, consciencelessness, and malice. Doesn't sound very happy. Then it awakens into charya, unselfish religious service, or karma yoga. Once matured in charya, it enters kriya, devotion or bhakti yoga, and finally blossoms into kundalini yoga. Jnana is the state of enlightened wisdom, reached toward the path's end as a result of self-realization. Oh, we got our first unique here. Gurudeva's unique contribution to practicing the yogas, which sometimes he uses the yoga terms in merging with Shiva and not the padas, is that you should first focus on karma yoga, next bhakti yoga, and then raja yoga, and that a certain proficiency in each should be attained before starting the next. So Gurudeva explains the yogas as also being progressive, which is not the most widely known version of them. The soul does not move quickly from one stage to another. It is a deliberate process, and within each stage there exist vast libraries of knowledge containing the sum of thousands of years of teachings unraveling that particular experiential vista. So this is an important point in Gurudeva's teachings, that we need to look at the spiritual path as taking more than one lifetime. If we are kind of fanatically focused on getting it all done in this lifetime, causes too much stress, too much tension, and it doesn't work. So what I like to say is it's important to enjoy the journey, because it's a long journey. So don't try and rush to the end. Tirumandaram 1447 states, those who follow the yana path and who have been blessed with Shiva yana will ultimately attain oneness with Shiva. Those who follow the yoga path and who are practicing the 8 disciplines of yoga will evolve into siddhis in due course and install themselves in a state of total absorption, samadhi. Those who follow the kriya path in accordance with their maturity and choice of deity will perform the relevant ritualistic worship daily without fail. Atmartha puja. Those who have set themselves in the charya path are intent on rendering service to the devotees and to the temples spread over this large world. I like that one in the sense that it's not just the temples, which sometimes that's how it's defined. We do the chores in the temples. It's also service to the devotees, such as feedings and helping people in need. Our second section is entitled Anava Marga, and Gurudeva's unique contribution to Anava Marga is he created the whole concept. No one else talks about Anava Marga. So we felt there was a need to name a certain way of life that takes place before individuals take up religion, so he calls it the Anava Marga. If you look it up in anyone else's dictionary except ours, you won't find it. Gurudeva says, we are concerned to define anava because a word can be dispatched too quickly. Concept can be forgotten. Anava, the personal ego, finding oneself with a small s, the personal identity, gaining intellectual freedom are all modern cliches. Defining the Anava Marga appeared in my mind as a necessary thing to do while I was helping devotees to understand the Charya Marga, Kriya Marga, Bhakti Marga, Karma Marga, and Raja Yoga. To offset the negative with the positive better explains the positive. To understand the pure essence of ignorance, where comes... oh, that's good. To understand the pure essence of ignorance, where it comes from, its values, beliefs, and motivations, better define the heights of wisdom, out of which comes dharma and aspirations for mukti. Sometimes, in fact, we see Anava Margis thinking they are Yoga Margis. We cannot advance on the path without a starting place. No race was ever won, but that everyone began at the same place. To know where we are on the path of life, progressing to mukti, which is one of the 4 tenets of life, dharma, artha, kama, and mukti, merger with Shiva, we should not be deluded by the ignorance of what the anava actually is and what artha and kama are, the strength of their hold on the soul, preventing the dharma and the final attainment of mukti. This is a nice graphic here. Perhaps you've seen that person standing in the back of the temple. People who are living totally on the Anava Marga are not religious, and if attending religious functions, they stand with folded arms on the outside looking in. Their only emotions are for themselves, their immediate family and friends, but only if the latter prove useful to them. Selfishness and avarice are 2 descriptive words for their lifestyle. To their immediate family, they are protective, kind, and resourceful, provided the spouse, sons, and daughters are productive and equally as concerned for the family welfare. The animal instinct prevails of let's preserve the nest, the lair, at all costs. The businessman on the Anava Marga is generous by all appearances, gives enough to gain praise, adulation, and to make friends. In proportion to his wealth, he gives a pittance. There is always some attachment to the gift, some favor to be eventually reaped. The gift is a purchase in disguise. The Anava Margi in giving charity would always want adulation, credit, name to be mentioned, and if it is a large amount, some control in the use of it. There are strong strings attached. He may even follow up years later and wreak criticism and havoc if the gift given in cash or kind is not maturing in value. In contrast, the devotee of God on the Kriya Marga would know that he was only giving to himself through indirection and placing his gift freely in the hands of those he trusts. Trust is always preceded by love. There is no difference between the 2 except the method of follow-up. The Anavamargi becomes the law. The Kriyamargi knows that divine law will work for him if he follows the path of righteousness, while the Anavamargi is driven to manipulate the law in fulfillment of each of his concerns. A personal identity and well-defined ego is the Anava, and the pursuit of the development of that is the Marga. Each Purusha, human soul, must go through the Anava Marga, a natural and required path for those whose bloom is the fulfillment of the senses, of the intellect, and all the complexities of doing. So that's important. All of us have gone through it. We weren't interested in religion. We were interested in ourselves, our family, and just focusing on them. So Gurudev was not trying to criticize it, because everyone goes through it. He's just trying to help us understand it. It is prior to our entrance upon the Anava Marga, and while we are happily on the Anava Marga, that we create the karmas to be understood and overcome later when we walk the Charya and Kriya Margas. So that made it an important statement. It is prior to our entrance upon the Anava Marga. So there's a stage even before the Anava Marga, a stage of just not being that focused, kind of under the sway of the instinctive mind and not having any real high-minded ambitions in life, such as a career and so forth. So that's prior to the Anava Marga. Anava Marga is trying to be successful, but only for your benefit and that of your family. You have to understand before you can overcome. This is the time we do ourselves in before and on the Anava Marga. That's what the graphic is trying to say on the left, that our actions are creating karmas that we'll face in the future. So that's doing ourselves in. And later understand the all-pervasiveness of Shiva, the laws of karma, dharma, samsara. Yes, of course, this is the time the mischief is done. The Anavamargi looks at God from a distance. He does not want to get too close, and does not want to drift too far away. Lives between lower consciousness and higher consciousness, between the Manipura, chakra, willpower, Swadhisthana, reason, Muladhara, memory, and the lower three, Atala, Vitala, and Sutala, fear, anger, and jealousy. Therefore, God is at a distance. He sees himself pluralistically, separate from God, coexistent with God. Those who fear God anger easily. They fear their elders, they fear the government, they fear impending disaster, and they fear disease. God is just one item on the long list of things that they fear. They are not on the path of spiritual unfoldment. Their higher chakras are dreaming benignly, waiting for the consciousness to explore them. Only when someone begins to love God is he on the path of spiritual unfoldment. Only then is he a seeker. Only then does his budding love begin to focus on religious icons. Only then is he able to nurture his love into becoming a bhaktar, and at the same time a religious person, a giving person. That is the Charya path. We come onto the Charya Marga from the Anava Marga. We come to Lord Ganesha's feet from the Anava Marga. He is now the guide. The personal ego has lost its hold. The Yoga Marga must come naturally out of intense bhakti and internalized worship. The intensity of bhakti is developed on the Kriya Marga. Final remains of the ego are pulverized on the Charya Marga, where Shivathondu, selfless service, is performed unrelentingly with no thought of reward, but a hope that the punya, merit, will be beneficial in the long run. Anava Marga is easy to leave through total surrender to God, gods, and Guru, along with seva, service to religious institutions. Surrender, prapati, is the key. All the religions' teachings teach surrender to the divine forces. Great suffering, the psychic surgery kind of suffering, great repentance is experienced in the overlapping of the Charya Marga with the Anava Marga. The beginning knowledge of Hindu temple worship, scripture being dragged into it by some aggressive teacher. Later, a desire for reconciliation. All this leads to penance, prayaschitta, followed by serious sadhana. It is not without a great ordeal and effort, soul-searching and decision-making that one marga bends into the other or bows before the other before it releases the consciousness to go on. Wonderful description there. Okay, it's kind of a repeat of the previous slide. Third section is entitled Charyapada. Charyapada, stage of good conduct, is the first stage of religiousness and the foundation for the next three stages. As I mentioned, it's also called the Dasa Marga, meaning path of servitude, for here the soul relates to God as servant to master. The Patavi attainment is Salokya, sharing the world of God. Charya is most commonly described as acts of service done at the temple. However, it also gives general guidelines for conduct. Charya just means conduct in its broadest sense. Tirumandaram gives such a guideline in verse 1444 in stating that adoration that displaces anger is Charya worship. Oh, you've heard this before. Se yit kadai ne sa shivapusai ame. So adoration that displaces anger. Sabaratnam Shivacharya elaborates on this line. The worship of Shiva pertaining to the Charya path is to be with pure and spontaneous love, which wards off anger, lust, and other such vices, and which renders fitness to the devotees to do services without expecting any benefit or reward. So he even broadens it. He says, it's not just anger, it's lust and other such vices. Needed to be warded off with love, with devotion. So we have a unique contribution to practicing Charya from Gurudeva, which is to include the 10 yamas as a core practice. In other words, getting control of the instinctive mind, such as a tendency to become angry and hurtful. That's what the yamas are all about. So Gurudeva's write-up is the only write-up on the padas that puts the yamas in Charya, which is logical. The evolution of the soul through the stage of Charya, or service, may itself take many, many lives. We see people every day who are working to be of service, to be more efficient, to be more useful to others. They are not necessarily inclined toward devotion, yet they may be deeply concerned with humanitarian programs, with selflessly helping their fellow man. An entire life may be spent in Charya, and the next life and the next. It is a slow process with its own timing. Not every stage of experience can be accepted at once. The path of Charya begins with the avoidance of wrongful action and can be likened to the early training of a child in which he is told, don't do this instead. Don't behave in that way. This is the proper behavior. In early life, a child learns what is right by being told what not to do. Spiritual life, too, we have these avoidances, these restraints. So yama means restraint. Oh, the 10 yamas, I won't read them. We have them all memorized, but we'll just let the slide play. The yamas give him guidelines that stabilize him in the beginning, controlling the instinctive mind. These inner reins help him to know what is right help him to control his karma and educate his intellect by laying a foundation of quiet within the instinctive mind, a foundation upon which the intellect may build a knowledgeable structure. In other words, if someone is regularly expressing the instinctive mind, such as through violent outbursts and so forth, their mind's always upset. Every major emotional upset takes 3 days to calm down. So if you have a second one within the 3-day period, it means you're never without an emotional upset. So with the mind constantly disturbed like that, you're not able to do any of the deeper practices. So we have to get that under control first. Charya is the state of overcoming basic instinctive patterns and learning to work for the sake of work. It is a simple fulfillment of right action and the first step on the spiritual path in our religion. Duty to our parents, to our community, to the wife and children, to the temple and the town or village, honoring holy men and respecting elders, all this must be fulfilled for Charya to be perfected. Work for the sake of work rather than for the fruits of our labor is commonly referred to by its Sanskrit term, nishkama karma. The attitude of non-expectation of fruits of action is called nishkama bhava. So we're doing it without kama. We're not doing it without a desire for getting something out of it other than the punyam. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do. And this practice is what lessens the sense of ego we start with when taking up the Charyapada, and as was pointed out by the whole concept of the Anavamarga, the ego can be pretty strong before we take up the Charyapada. One goes to the temple at this stage of unfoldment because it is expected of him. He goes there not to practice yoga, not to evolve a personal relationship with the deity, but because he must. It is his duty. His instinctive mind at this stage of his evolution is so strong that it must be governed firmly by external laws, external forces. He either obeys or suffers the consequences of disobedience. It is his fear of the consequences that motivates him more than anything else. Certainly he may feel guilty or fearful when he approaches the temple, for he is aware of his own transgressions and omissions. But little by little he gains confidence and understanding. His conscience begins to take the place of outer sanctions and gradually becomes his guideline. Whereas before he never felt guilty even for his worst transgressions, now he begins to feel remorse for misdeeds. Tendencies towards selfishness lose their hold on the devotee as he strives to become the perfect servant to God and mankind. The sequential pattern of evolution is experienced by each individual in a microcosmic sense in each lifetime. Even if they have been experienced in a previous life, the lessons contained in each stage are in a sense relearned in childhood. If we have previously learned them, then they will be quickly mastered. But if we have not learned these lessons yet in another life, we draw to ourselves in this life the experiences that we need to do so. This knowledge is an inheritance that comes along with the physical body. In other words, experiences from other lives affect the patterns of experience in this life. With basic inherited knowledge, the soul develops an intellectual mind through the good graces of its own personal karma and destiny, provided his intellectual mind is in accordance and in harmony with the precepts of his religion. If not, he has problems. Those problems can be overcome, but they are problems while they are being overcome. If his beliefs are not in harmony with his religion, that conflict can stagnate and congest his natural advancement and must be resolved before he can move on to the next stage. So this one brings in the actions. We perform service at the temple, practical ways. Sweeping the marble floors, polishing the brass oil lamps, weaving fragrant garlands for the pujas, helping other devotees in their lives, and in general, through a humble and unseen kind of service. Worship during the Charya stage is entirely external, yet it is entirely meaningful to the devotee. In Charya, the devotee looks upon the stone image in the temple sanctum with his physical eyes, and to him, darshan of the deity is the physical sight of the stone image of God. So we want to remember that, because we're going to have 3 other forms of darshan, one for each pada. So in the Charya pada, darshan means looking at the physical murti, seeing the murti, and that's darshan, sight of the deity. So we have 4 subdivisions. Charya and Charya, Kriya and Charya, Yoga and Charya, Jnana and Charya, etc. So Charya and Charya consists of personal service in the temple, as we read before, all those actions, polishing the floors, making garlands. That's the action or the conduct part of Charya. Kriya and Charya consists of attending the Parartha Puja, and per the guidelines of the Agamas and one's Guru, offering worship to the Murti of any of the 25 forms of Shiva. If not the form of Shiva, he may worship Ganapati or Skanda. So that's the Kriya part of Charya. We are attending the Parartha Puja. Yoga and Charya consists of meditation after the Parartha Puja worship is complete. Jnana and Charya is the experiential knowledge gained by these practices. Tamil word, Anubhava Unarchi. Actually 2 words, Anubhava Unarchi. The idea of, it's an experience, Anubhava Unarchi, that brings wisdom. So it's not a reasoning process. Wisdom is coming from our intuition. We're having an insight in some way that we didn't have prior to that point in time. So we are all the way up to 603. And a unique insight from Gurudeva: meditate after the puja. Gurudeva gives a profound and detailed explanation of yoga and charya, and let me read that a little slower. Gurudeva gives a profound and detailed explanation of yoga and charya and jnana and charya in Merging with Shiva, chapter 21, Total Surrender, which is definitely unique. And if you've never tried this, you should. To internalize worship after the puja is over, this is in the temple, sit before the deity and draw into yourself all the pranas you feel around your body. Then draw those energies up the spine into the head. This is done with the mind and with the breath. It is very easy to do. It is especially easy when one is at the end of a major karmic cycle, meaning there's more calmness, naturally more calmness present. The bhakti of uncompromising surrender, prapati, to the God during a temple puja awakens the Amrita. The Amrita is the sweet essence from the Sarasvara chakra, top of the head. It is the binding yoke to the divine. Bind yourself in the lotus posture after temple worship and simply internalize all the feeling that you had for the God during the worship. That's all there is to it. The yogi yoked within enjoys the Amrita that flows from the cranium throughout his body. Devotees who want to awaken the higher chakras and sustain that awakening on the safe path will throw themselves into becoming uncompromising bhaktars. Then all the gods of all 3 worlds will open their hearts and shower their blessings upon them. Then we get a little bit on the intuitive flashes. Anubhava Unarchi. Gurudeva gives this unique statement about the jnana stage of the 4 padas. The first sadhana, therefore, is to always hold the overview and cling in your memory to the intuitive flashes that come as a result of your practices. Cling in your memory to to the intuitive flashes that come. These intuitive flashes come from deep within and are the only thing that should be remembered. For this is your jnana, your insightfulness, your own wisdom breaking through. And of course, that's why it's called jnana in Charya. So we have Yogaswami. He was very strong on this, finding the knowledge within you, particularly for someone who tended to be relying heavily on books on philosophy, Hindu philosophy. The book is within you. Turn over the leaves and study. It must come from within. Don't rely on book knowledge. Trust the self alone. Don't read books. It is in you. So that's, particularly for someone who is in that category of being overly intellectual and trying to understand everything through reading books. Reading books is good to learn the basics, but the point is, for actual realization, you have to go within inside yourself. Oh, we have a quote from Tirumandaram. We've read this one before, so we'll just go through the slide here. It's a little bit of repetition in this presentation because I've combined sources from different information from different sources to point out the uniqueness of Gurudeva's teachings, and sometimes it's creating a duplication, which it's doing in this case. So, review of Charya. Stage of conduct or good conduct. Dasa Marga, path of servitude. Soul relates to God as a servant to his master. Salokya Patavi, sharing the world of God. So just one comment on sharing the world of God before we end. Looks like this material is going to take three Zoom satsangs. So the idea is, before the Charyapada, an individual isn't even sure God exists. Kind of an agnostic state. I'm not sure. I don't have any sense that God exists. So in the Charyapada, we've moved to sharing the world of God, meaning God exists. I can feel God's there, but he sure seems to be at a great distance. So the image I have in mind, for those of you who saw the TV series Downton Abbey, the UK series, old-fashioned, well-to-do family, there's lots of servants downstairs because, it was very hard it took a lot of manpower to do anything in those days, cook, etc. So they're all downstairs, and say out of a staff of 20, maybe only 3 of them actually go upstairs. They're the head servants go upstairs, most mature group, and the others don't even go upstairs. They just spend their whole life downstairs, but they know there are people upstairs. And those who do go upstairs tell them about those people, etc. But they're always downstairs. They're at a great distance from the household itself. So that to me is Salokya. You're in the same world, but you're really at the greatest distance you can be at. Oh, thank you very much.